Hey guys, and welcome to how to paint a Darkspawn warrior for my brand, Blight of Gods. So today we're going to go through and paint this little guy. We're going to be using underpainting and overpainting techniques with an airbrush. I've got my little group of colors here. We'll be using purples and greens, light blues. If you go to the website, the link is in the down there. You'll see the colors that are used for these Darkspawn warriors. They're, like a bluish tone, but they can be any color. They're basically aquatic demons from my little necromantic world that they're from, Catan, and this one is pretty special, so I'm really happy to be showing it to you today. As of this video, if you go to the link in the down there, he's available to purchase STL files for 3D printing. This one is a print. It was printed at 50 microns, and it's basically a heroic 75mm scale, so a little bit bigger than your normal miniature, but that's why this one is really good to use for an airbrush, because you can get into more of the details and so on. A little bit like the video I did on the Ghoul Ripper as well. So this will make my third 75mm figure that I've done for my store, and yeah, I'm pretty happy. So he's out right now as of this video, as I've said. So yeah, if you want to go along with this painting tutorial, then just head over there and pick him up, and you can put him together, and we'll go along and do this together. But I think it should be really fun. We're going to come back in with the brush and do a bunch of little highlights, very similar to the Ghoul Ripper one, and we'll build it up. But the basic premise is to use an underpainting and overpainting technique to give us a lot of color variety on the surface in a relatively easy way. It's not too difficult to get this done, and you'll see how the colors blend together and give you a nice finish. So it basically speeds up your time, and you get something cool out of it. So I guess I should stop blabbering on, and we should get started, eh? So to begin with, we start with the underpainting, and we begin with that Imperial Blue, and you're just airbrushing that on all the way around just to get rid of the black and give us a nice dark color base to work from. And so the first few colors are going to be that underpainting, and so once that's all down, you're going to move into that purple, and so nice deep purple, and you start just hitting the areas, the undersides of the anatomy, anywhere where we want to simulate some of the blood coming to the surface, around joints, under the armpit, etc., maybe around the chest, all those sort of areas around the body, just to give a bit of variation with that blue and the dark shadows. And then once that's done, we move into a sort of spot highlight of that Warlord purple, which is like a magenta tone, and you're gonna just pick areas where you want to see a little bit more vibrancy with that sort of blood coming to the surface and a bit more sort of interest there, so maybe around the chest, elbows, hands, etc. And then when that's down, then we want to now bring out a bit of light. So I use some turquoise here just to do some spot highlights of a more saturated sort of green blue. And so on the chest, the main muscle areas around the body, just bringing it out a little bit, because when we put the other blue tones over the top, they're a little more desaturated. So this is going to add a little bit more saturation overall. So once that's down, then we move into, an overall tone. So that's electric blue with the Imperial Blue mixed together. And so you're getting a slightly darker version, and it's from the top down like a zenithal, just hitting all the main areas and very softly blending everything together. And so we're starting to see the skin tone. And that leads us into then a slightly lighter version now, which has more of the electric blue mixed in. We're not washing out our airbrush during these steps. We're just adding it as we go for these blue stages, because there's not necessary really. So you're just going to move around and hit those top areas to give it a bit of light. And then once that's done, we move into sort of like a discoloration around the chest and some of the areas to further push some brightness. So I use that grey blue and just do a very, very soft little spot sort of lightening of that chest area. And that's going to help to just vary up the tones across the body, but not too much, just enough to see a little bit of brightness. And then further that coming through with a bit of the pale grey blue mixed in, and then hitting that again. And so just little areas, top of the back, around the chest, maybe on the back of the head a little bit, just anywhere where you think that it would be nice to get an even paler blue color, so it varies it up a little bit and you don't have all the same color across the whole model, because it's a larger figure and you want to see a bit of difference. Now it's time to set up that gradient. So we've got our Imperial Blue, the Electric Blue, grey Blue, and the Pale Grey Blue, and so on, and white. And you're going to set up about 9 steps there, as you'll see on the palette. And we're starting from, I guess, the mid-tone, which is basically the Grey Blue, with a little bit of influence of that Electric Blue as well. And so we just begin highlighting up the raised areas, the top surfaces. You'll see me doing it across the chest and the head and the top of the back and so on, tops of the legs. Leaving the undersides and the areas of shadow pretty much fading away, and you're not really focusing on those, and so that you end up with your first stage of highlighting, I guess. And so then once we've done that, we need to connect the darker areas. So we go back down to our lower tones, which is the Electric Blue mixed with Imperial Blue, and you begin to highlight up those shadow areas, you know, around the lats, the side of the back and so on, undersides of the arms and that sort of thing. So we get a connection between those highlights and those midtones. And then using the Electric Blue as your highlight, just going through and just highlighting up some of those areas as well. So that should then connect all of the muscle groups around the body and give you a connected sort of highlighted surface, but with a difference. And then once that's down, we now move into sort of almost pure grey blue, and this is a bit higher than our mid-tone, and that's where we start to do the highlighting process, keeping it in a really painterly, feathered style, where you see the brush moving across the surface, giving you lots of like interesting mark making, and just hitting those top areas. And then once that's done, you should end up with, you know, a relatively modeled surface across that mini. And so we now go into the highlighting steps, and with that we're looking at that grey blue mixed with a little bit of pale grey, and you're going to begin line highlighting those muscle groups across the tops of all the surfaces, etc., just building in some highlights, paying more focus around the chest and the face, which is the focal point, and then moving into your pale grey, and again doing less of the model, focusing really heavily on the top of the model, not really going down into the bottom of the legs and so on. You're just trying to hit all those really main features of the muscle groups and the anatomy to really make it pop, and then moving into your sort of more spot highlights. So this is now pale grey mixed with white, and you're just picking out the really important details around the face, you know, the cheekbone, the brow line, etc., across the chest, anywhere where the eye is going to be drawn to, you know, on the model, across the top of the back where there's a lot of anatomical features that are quite interesting, just you know, picking those out. And then finally a really tight spot highlight, you know, with a fine detail brush that's got more white mixed in, and you're just going to be touching those little areas around the face, just focusing on that area and nowhere else, so that the face really pops forward and you know, is the first thing you see when you look at the model. And now it's on to the glazing step. So here we're just going to be adding a little bit more color into those shadows to bring out some of that underpainting that we did earlier with the airbrush. So we're going to start with that darker purple, and you're going to mix a lot of water in, probably about 3 to 4 drops of water, so it's quite thin. And we're going to very carefully just start dabbing that around into the cracks and grooves in between the muscle groups, you know, underneath the pectorals, down the center of the chest, etc., around the knees. You'll see me dotting it in here and there, and just sort of gently fading in this deep purple color, just in around the deepest areas to simulate that blood coming to the surface, so we've got a bit more variety in those shadows. And once that's done, you'll move on to the warlord purple, as you'll see me doing in the same manner, but now maybe less so. And then finally, once you put that down, we'll do a little tiny bit of turquoise as well, but be very careful with that, as it's quite strong and bright, and you don't want to brighten those shadows too much. But in certain little spots, you might want to add a little touch of that extra sort of greeny blue color, just to bring out a bit of saturation. And now it's time to hit up that bone areas, all the armor and so on that's in that bone color. And so we're starting with the US fill drab, as you'll see me basing that out. And then we're going to set up our gradient. And so for our gradient, it's going to be the US fill drab with a Ushabti bone and white. And we're going to set up about 5 steps there. So a mix of Ushabti with fill drab, and then Ushabti with white, etc., all down the line. And so after that base tone is down, we begin that darker style Ushabti mixed with the fill drab. And you're going to start just feathering that in to build up the base layer for this bone color. And once you've got that down, it's just a process of moving through into the next stage, which is the main color of Shabti, which is a sort of mid-tone cream. And we're just going to be locking down that color across the surfaces, all the bone areas, and doing a kind of feathering approach as you're seeing me doing. So we're getting a lot of that darkness, that darker brown coming through. This is a very old bone. You know, these demons are in the water, so it's a very sort of, you know, rotten kind of bone color. So we want it quite dark. And so once that's down, you'll be moving through and then doing the highlights. And that's a Shabti with white and then a Shabti with more white. And so you're just going to be working through and just feathering in little light touches in the centers of those bone armor plates and so on across the edges, and just building up that light. So you're getting a nice variety, very dark and then up to very light areas across those surfaces. And it's quite pleasurable to do, just nice and relaxing, just using a feathering approach, just the tip of the brush, just doing little marks. You'll see me doing it, just picking out, you know, key areas across the edges of armor and so on, and making it lighter so that you get a nice read across the surface. And now we're going to get that base down. So this is a very classic color. I've done this many times. You will see on my channel, most of my stuff ends up with this type of dark, you know, browny gray, greenish sort of tone for my bases. So I build it from Necromancer Cloak, which is dark gray, and then base that up, and then basically dry brush the Dungeon Gray, I think it's called, and the Uniform Gray up into then white, and just building up that with the dry brushing and getting a nice, you know, a nice gradient of values across it. And then once that's down, moving into some Biltan green and sepia wash mixed with the Lamia medium, and do a kind of a mixing of those two to get a sort of a greeny brown color, and you're just dabbing it everywhere to sort of stain that gray base and give you some variation. It's a nice way just to get a moody base done. And then finally, what you'll see me doing is using that same Biltan and the sepia wash with the Lamia medium, about 2 or 3 drops, and then very carefully glazing some of that in to all of the bone armor that we've just done. So you get a sort of a very old, moldy, sort of, you know, almost waterlogged kind of bone color, which is appropriate for these demons. Now with the demonic blade, first we want to make it black, so undercoat it black, and then we're moving into successive layers of line highlights using dark sea blue, the sick green, kraken skin, and white. And so you'll see me build up that gradient there and begin lining in the dark sea blue first, or on the edges of that blade, and all the little tiny points on the edges. And then we'll be moving into just successive layers of highlighting, so the dark sea blue with the sick green blended in, and just hitting those edges using the side of your brush like a blade, and just hitting those edges there, and then moving on to the sick green and hitting more of the top areas of the blade to sort of get a glow effect. And so once you've done that, you'll move up through into sick green with kraken skin, and that's where you start to get the highlights. And from that point on, you're trying to just hit the very tips of all of those little points along the blade. So you're starting to get a nice gradation from dark to light to the very ends. And so once you've got that down and you're happy with it, the next stages then the straight kraken and the kraken mixed with white. And so these are more sort of spot highlights where you're just picking out the very tips and just working that in. You'll see me doing it, just building in those lights across the surface of that blade on both sides and the undersides, feathering in little marks and so on where the blade is, you know, creating creases along that edge, you know, putting little feather marks and so on, and just building out that light so we get a nice clean result at the end. And I'm not sure if I show it here in this footage, but what I did then is go through with some satin varnish from Vallejo and just coat the blade, so we get a sort of a satin finish to the blade, so it's got a little bit of a shine to it, so it's a sort of obsidian blade or something like that. But you don't have to do that, but that's just what I did at the end. I'm pretty sure the footage is there, but if not, that's what I did. So the final sections of the model are just the cloth and the metallic areas that I've done. So with the cloth, I chose a very light turquoise color. So it's turquoise mixed with toxic mist and up into white, and just feathering that in just to give you like a sort of bright, vibrant color to contrast against the darker blue. And you'll just see me working that up. And then with the metallic areas, I mixed in some sick green and some Imperial Blue into that lead belcher and built up a kind of green and a blue metallic for some of those areas on the weapon and on the shield and just built up with the silver into the highlights very simply, and then came back in with a little bit of the Nightshade Blue wash mixed with Lamy Medium just to darken some of the recesses and give you a little bit of shadows. I did that into the base as well where the depression is, just to really punch up some of those darks. And there we go, one Darkspawn Warrior done. So let's take a look. Yeah, so you can see they come up pretty well. You know, the detail's good. It's definitely a different challenge to, you know, smaller scale miniatures, but if you've never done a 75, or in this case a slightly heroic 75mm scale figure, it's definitely something worth trying at least once. Yeah, they're cool. You can do a lot of different things with the fading, with the airbrush, and then a lot of you know, different types of brush work, texture, and so on, as we've done here, a more painterly style where you can see some of the brush marks and so on. Yeah, it's really fun. You know, it's a freeing, I guess, process compared to, let's say, some more tighter versions you might do on a smaller model. This allows for that because it's, I guess, yeah, you're treating it more like a canvas, like an expressive thing. So it can you know, give you some good results. But yeah, I'm really super happy to have this one out because it's been a long time coming, and I've said this before with the other ones, but yeah, it's really fun to see these finally released and in the world, and I hope you enjoy it. So I'll leave a nice image of him at the end so you can see how it looks on a, you know, a better photo and so on, and the paint list. But otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed this. Please hit that like button, subscribe button, it really helps me out, and I guess I'll catch you on the next one.